Kia ora, it's Louise Ward here, and I'm the host of this episode of Made in New Zealand, where we talk to Kiwi musicians, artists and writers. And this week's guest, it's our great pleasure to welcome Andrene Low, multi-talented comedian, author, and author of the brand new book, DietVale, Starving to Death is the Easy Way Out. Is the world ready for DietVale, Andrene?
If they're ready for dieting, they're ready for DietVale.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale, but we'll get on to that shortly.
Yep.
So, who is Andrene Low? Tell us about yourself.
So, I started writing probably when I was about 9, and my first, I call it critical acclaim, was getting an A for writing an essay about the Aberhan Welsh mining village, where the whole slag heap destroyed the village.
I remember that well.
And we had to write a story on that, and I had nightmares about it for weeks afterwards because, of course, it was horrendous. And then I just played around with poetry and bits and pieces until I was doing a presentation skills course for work, and I did my graduation piece on breeding before 40, and it got enough laughs that somebody I worked with, who was involved with the comedy people at Kitty O'Brien's at that time in Auckland, said, "Oh, you should do a rookies night." And I said, "I will if you will." He said, "I will if you will." And neither of us would back down. So we ended up doing a rookies night together. We performed separately, but we did it on the same night. And on that night, Radar was on and Mike King. They were both doing their rookie nights as well.
Gosh.
So
what year was this? When was this? Ish. I've put you on the spot with that one.
It's got to be 20 years ago. It really was right when Mike King first started.
Right at the beginning.
And when To Radar was just Radar. And so I did that and got enough laughs that they invited me back, and then I was on the professional circuit there for 3 years. And that was performing every 3 weeks and always writing new material for that, and you'd always have it that it would be about 75% existing, 25% new, or sometimes more, depending on what you'd come up with. And it just kept on rolling over and over and over. And I'd always, at that point, it let you know that the writing, that was what I loved, because the performing could be sheer hell, because you could use one lot of material, people would be howling with laughter and hooting and cheering you on, and then you could use the same material 3 weeks later and they'd sit there and look at you and not laugh, and inside you're dying and going, what is going on? So
is that the audience?
That's the audience.
And it's like if someone's there and they're buoyant and they're ready to receive, then does that go viral in the crowd?
It can be. It can definitely be that. I used to do better with men in the audience than women. Why that was, I don't know. But
is it that the women going,
Yeah, a little bit of sit back and, I don't know about this.
Or competitiveness.
Yeah, and things like if you're taking the mickey out of men, then they'd be looking at their girlfriends and daring them to laugh. And so there was a lot of dynamics like that. And sometimes it was that you just get somebody with a completely different sense of humour who just didn't get your type of humour.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do about that, because you can't change what you're going to do halfway through. You can't change your style of humour. So
what's the process then? So you write novels.
Yeah.
So how is the process quite different to writing comedy?
Comedy, you have to make it idiot proof. You have to make it drunk proof. It has to be succinct. You've got no padding in there. So quite often what I'd do is I'd write out the bones of the joke, and that could be a page. You've then got to condense that down into a paragraph or 2 paragraphs so that you can get it out, because if you've got people drinking, their attention span is...
They're not going to listen to your story.
Very, very short. There's no story, there's no setup. You've just got to get in there as fast as you can, paint the picture, get the gist of it across, and then deliver the punchline and hope they laugh.
And did you get heckled much?
Not a lot. a lot of my work was things like plastic surgery, testicular implants, and it's a brave.
Just made me. Yeah.
It's a brave person that'll heckle you when you've got that sort of subject matter. It really is. So yeah.
So in that circuit, before we move on to, because it's fascinating. I don't get to sit down with many comedians. Any sort of funny, weird stories through your time
I
doing
think one of the highlights for me is I used to have this one joke, and it was about being on the pill when I was 16. And I said by the time I had been on the pill for 4 years, I had the body of a 40-year-old. And the guy in front of me started to laugh, and he took a big swig of his beer, and I said, and he wasn't a bad lay for an old guy. And the beer shot out of his nose, and then his mate started laughing, I started laughing, and it took me about a minute to get myself back under control again, because it was just one of those things. And I don't know whether I paused because I could see that, or it was just a natural pause. But
you found the comic gold moment in your mind.
It was, yeah.
That's brilliant. And I think that's quite infectious, isn't it? You know, once the comedian actually cracks himself up, if you see a person lose it, then you do as well.
Yeah.
It's like when Jimmy Carr cracks himself up and does his ridiculous laugh. It just sets everybody off.
Yeah.
Who's your favourite comedian? Who are the ones that you admire?
For me, favourites are ones like Eddie Izzard.
Oh, I love him.
You know,
love him.
Canteen on the Death Star, to me, is comedy gold.
It's like a tray.
Yeah. It is very hot. So I like that style of humour. A lot of the new ones coming up, I like the clever humour. I like that thinking about it. I find the humour in everyday life more now than anything else. Like, I was out for dinner on Saturday night after the book festival thing, and the two girls I was with ordered dessert. And one came out, and it was 3 ice cream cones in a holder. That was her dessert with ice cream. So it was like 3 ice creams. And the other girl got a tart that was about 40 mils across. And it was the juxtaposition of these 2 desserts, where one of them was like, yes, it was a tasting dessert, but come on.
Yeah.
It was tiny, and the other one could have fed the lot of us.
Yeah.
And we just got the giggles over it because it was so ridiculous.
And you can find humour like that. Just thinking of restaurant humour, I went to an unnamed restaurant, very posh one in Wellington one time, and he was the maitre d', actually came to our table and said, "Is there anything I can do to increase your pleasure?" And I lost my head. And he wouldn't serve us. After that, he wouldn't come back because I'd been disrespectful or something. Anyway, so I was very naughty that night, but yeah. So, writing, let's get on to your writing. So you say, you're quoted as saying that your mum inspired you. If she read what you wrote now, she'd probably give you a clip round the ear, but
she would.
How did she inspire you?
Well, from a very early age, she read to us, which I think is incredibly important. So I was brought up on one of my favourites, and it's still my favourite, is Ogden Nash, who people these days, hardly anyone's heard of him. And it was just, I still remember things like the trouble with the kitten is that eventually it becomes a cat. And, you know, that's one of his poems. They're tiny, but then she used to read to us Custard the Dragon, which were his rhyming stories. And the kids in my neighbourhood, we loved them so much. Mum would be sitting there reading them, and there'd be about 6 or 8 kids all just sitting there rapt, listening to this. So there was that. And then my mum actually did write. But, of course, in the days when it just wasn't as easy to get published back then. And, you know, she was a mum, and that was her job. That was how it was back then. But it was that love of words and, you know, getting dictionaries for birthday presents and just loving the written word. So, yeah.
Given the tools, and then if it's in you,
yes, absolutely.
You can use them.
Absolutely. Yeah. But then I've got my dad's sense of humour. Definitely my warped, slightly dark sense of humour is from him, which is why Mum would probably be the one.
Oh, we'll get on to the darkness.
Clipping.
The darkness of DietVale terrifies us all. So tell us about the progression of your books, because you have several series.
I do. So I started off writing what I will call chick lit, because it's about the best way to describe it.
How do you feel about that term? Because that was one of my questions for you.
It's really interesting, because a lot of people think that it's derogatory, but in actual fact, it's a good description of it, because it's for women and it is literary. It's a a lot of people think that it's a little bit light and frothy, but in actual fact it covers off serious issues, and it tends to be more about the female character. Yes, there might be some romance in it, but that's not the centre of the story, it's not the focus of the story. The stories tend to be more about how the character grows, what they learn, what their challenges are.
So it's feminist.
It is, rather.
In a way.
Yeah, well, it's, Friday Night Fever, my first chick lit, that absolutely is feminist because it was set in the 70s, and that was the second wave of feminism when women were starting to go, hey, if it's okay for the guys to sleep around, it's okay for me to sleep around. Because, of course, the pill became widely available. So that changed the way that women could behave completely. And of course, it's swung back a bit now, where it's almost like we're getting back to, you know, wear the red outfit sort of thing, you know.
If you look at other countries in the world going that way, it's a bit terrifying. I think
it's very terrifying.
We're going to be all right here for a bit, another 3 years anyway.
Absolutely.
But I took you off track there, so let's go back to the progression of the series.
So I started writing those, and then from there, so there's 3 full-length novels in that and 4 novellas. And then I decided to try my hand at what's called paranormal cozy mysteries, which are particularly popular in the United States because there's no swearing, there's no sex.
Okay.
It's a little mystery. They tend to be shorter in length, and so I thought I'll try those. And so I started writing the Marina Witches Mystery series, and that's under a pseudonym of Andrene Low, just to keep the two genres clear, you know, more separated. And they have sold incredibly well. And as of this morning, The Ghost Ship, which is the first in that series, has just got ticked over for 80 reviews on Amazon.
Brilliant.
With an average of 4.4 stars. So
these are the ones with the little dog as the familiar? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and 120, that's got 127 reviews on Goodreads. So they're doing really, really well. But they actually came about because in the background I was writing DietVale, and it's so dark that I wanted some light relief, and that was why Frankie B came out. It was just like, I need something a little bit lighter, because you start to get into it, especially when you're right in the middle of getting those first ideas down on paper, and it's just like, oh, this is dark.
Yeah.
And so even though I like writing dark, I was still putting the humour in that to lighten it, because it makes it easier and more accessible for people. I don't like doom and gloom all the time.
No.
You know?
And I feel it's a good time to talk about DietVale, because there's probably quite a lot to pick out of it.
Yeah.
So we start with Marilyn, and she's getting divorced. And it's hard not to spoil things, isn't it?
I know,
there are certain things quite early on that you just go, oh, okay. So if we say that she's divorced. She's divorced. She has eventually come out quite well out of that divorce. She is overweight and wants to get a boob job.
Yep.
And suddenly has the means with which to get it, but she's got to lose a bit of weight first. So off she goes. She finds DietVale on the web, and off she goes. And then things don't turn out quite as she anticipated.
Not
and
at
it
all.
becomes, I mean, you've got humour all the way through it, even in the darkest bits there's humour. But it really does get very dark. Dark web is involved.
Yes.
All sorts of other social taboos are involved, shall we say. So where did this come from, Andrene? What is going on in your head?
It worries me at times. But to a certain extent, once you for me anyway, once I start to write a novel, I'll have I don't, like a lot of people plot to the nth degree. I tend to plot in general directions.
Okay.
And that it means that sometimes the characters can take over. And when I first started writing, I used to corral them back under control or change things. Now I go, it's a first draft, you can change it later. And so that the characters will behave in a certain way, and then I'll get through even to the end of the book, and something happens that ties them perfectly with their action in chapter 3. And I don't know how it is that your mind works like that, but it's fascinating. And so to a certain extent, the story wrote itself. And then it just started getting darker and darker, because it's not nice what's happening to them. It's and And there are things like that do go on in the world.
But this is the terrifying thing, because, most people have heard of the dark web, and they don't allow themselves to think about what goes on in the dark web. But we actually do start DietVale, don't we, with a seedy bloke waiting for his mum to go out, and down he goes into his locked cellar and puts his, video TV on, and he's paid to watch something.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily what you think, but it's kind of worse.
Yeah.
So, for us to actually confront that there are people in real life out there doing that kind of thing, and there's a market for it.
Oh, totally there is, and it's horrifying, some of the things that you do get snippets of. I certainly didn't do any research into the dark web, because you just don't even want to go
there.
Google
it.
No, exactly. So, and one of the lines I use later in the book is, who's the sicker person? The person paying for it to be done, or the person who's willing to do it?
Yeah, the provider.
For the money.
Yeah, the enabler.
The enabler, yeah. So, so it was, So
one of my questions was, do your characters inhabit you, and you're saying that they take you in directions that you weren't anticipating? Or do they mirror some of your experiences? So where do you get them?
I think that, well, I certainly haven't been through anything of what Marilyn's been through.
Thank God.
I wouldn't be sitting here if I was.
Planing.
Yeah. Those woodwork classes came in very handy.
Yep.
I think that to a certain extent, anybody who writes will draw on some personal experiences, but it might not necessarily be matching to that exactly, but there'll be a time when you've felt lousy, or you've felt scared, or you've given up hope, or whatever. And it's more the emotions you use than absolutely, hey, that happened to me, so I'll write about it.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of writers do that, but I don't. I tend to, I'm more of an emotional being, so that's what I plug into, yeah.
Yeah. So where did you get the idea originally for DietVale?
So I have an absolute abhorrence of reality TV. And how scripted it is, and how not only are the contestants manipulated, the audience is manipulated, and I can see it, and it just annoys. I can't watch them, especially the home renovation shows where suddenly it's just like, oh, we didn't realise this was a supporting wall, and I'm yelling at the TV and going, if you'd gone downstairs you would have. So, look in the roof, and it's just like, you're meant to be a professional. So, so there was that, and then there's that whole thing of, like, at the time I was going through weight gain because of an autoimmune condition, and it didn't matter what I did, I couldn't lose the weight. And then I can't remember whether I thought of it, or I was talking to somebody about it and I was saying, wouldn't it be just great if they could just put you to sleep for a while and put you on this, no calories, just absolutely what you have to do, and have all those little muscle things going on you, so you don't have to exercise, it just happens. And then that kind of evolved from there, and it's just, and it was like what people are prepared to put themselves through to be accepted by society. And women in particular, it's just like this whole, the whole weight gain thing. You've got to be a certain size, and Insta ready 24/7, and everybody's photos that are on Instagram have been manipulated. They've got that much makeup on. It's
filters.
It's hard to see who they are, and this is how you stand so your stomach looks flattered. This is how you get the thigh gap.
The thing where you do that and it makes your chest look skinny.
Yeah, all of that. Okay. It's just weird.
I read that in a book.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? It's just like, it's kind of sad, and so
it really is.
I just took it to the nth degree.
You certainly did.
Yes, I did, didn't I? Yes.
So, I mean, when they're in the middle of nowhere, Marilyn gets taxied out, and then a very strange man comes to pick her up, and off they go to DietVale, and she's fed this gloop.
The protein shake.
The protein shake. Yeah, well, and again, we can't spoil too much with that, but it's the mind of a writer that you've just obviously had that thought of, and how does it all progress? Oh, you could do this, you could do this.
I don't think it's even a conscious thing. I really don't think it's a conscious thing. Like, a lot of that, I was dictating the first draft using Dragon dictating software, and because my background's as a shorthand typist, I think with punctuation. So I'd be going, no, full stop, comma,
Okay.
open quotes, close quotes, and just throwing it down just to get the gist of the idea. And then, of course, you go back and craft it and edit and edit and edit and edit. So a lot of it it's just the stream of consciousness. You get in the flow, and there's times I'll be writing things and it's not until you read them back later that you're even conscious. Well, I guess I wrote it. It's on my computer. I had to have written it. And the words are just there. And sometimes I'll burst out laughing because I won't even remember writing the joke.
That's brilliant. I've amused myself.
Yeah.
Yes. So do you see that text? Can you visualise it when you're saying open quotes, close quotes?
It almost is, because I know that when I learnt to do shorthand. It was a year-long course, and in the end I was thinking in outlines, because we did so much practice. Because you have to pass those tests, you've got to get 95% and above.
Gosh.
Yeah, and that includes losing marks for commas, which you have to put in yourself, which was where I learnt proper punctuation.
Yeah. So you've actually got the grammar.
Yeah.
Inside you, in your brain.
Yeah.
I find the writing process fascinating, and I was talking to an author on the weekend, Matt Kalman, and he was saying that when he's out on his bike or running or kayaking, he would have written a chapter, and it took us a moment to figure out what he meant. What, you had like a pen and paper while you're cycling? But no, he's written it in his head, and he can pretty much remember it, and then he goes home and then he types it out. Well, and it's pretty much how it was in his head. The
other night, because I'm already started to plot Dead Meat, which follows this one up, and in the front where you've got where you say you do anything to lose the weight, do you really mean it?
Yeah.
So in the next one is, why bother feeding the poor when they can feed us?
Oh my God. Which has given us a clue, really, as to some of the content of DietVale.
Well, they might not have got rid of everybody at the Vale.
Okay.
There were some parts of that complex that were not explored.
No, that's it. All sorts of bits that are to be discovered. So you're working on book 2 now?
I am, yeah.
And how's that going? How's it progressing?
It's just in my head at the moment.
Okay.
Got the cover. I know that sounds weird, but I've got the cover. I like having the covers done first, and I've heard of a lot of other authors that it's the same thing, because it just helps you visualise the overall vibe of the book.
Yeah. And if we can put that up to the camera, and people can zoom in if they want to, that's DietVale. So it's not the spa that you really want to go to.
Not at all.
It's not somewhere where they're going to bring you a lettuce leaf and a peanut.
Well, not always guaranteed.
No, eventually, I suppose. But yeah. So tell us about the launch. We're launching DietVale in Hawke's Bay.
So that's going to be at Wardini Books in Napier.
It is.
And that's at 6 o'clock on Thursday the 29th. There will be beverages. I'm not sure about food yet. There may be protein shakes.
I advise against.
Do not go near the
Don't go near the gloop.
And so I've got a couple of friends coming down from Auckland from that. So one of those girls, fellow authors, going to MC for me, so you can sit back and relax.
Oh, how beautiful! Drink your wine.
And I'll read. I'm only going to read a short excerpt from the book, though, because things do happen so quickly that I don't want to. So I'm torn about whether I read that intro bit or not, or might just start in chapter 1.
I think it's creepy enough, actually.
It sets the scene a bit more, because otherwise, when Lee Murray read it and did her quote for the front cover, the full quote starts off innocuously enough, but then devolves into something much, much darker, because at that stage I didn't have that prologue. It was a very early version.
Okay.
And I thought, no, you need to set the scene that this is not women's fiction.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Although I talking about it with friends at the weekend, it is women's horror.
It's not fluffy. Let's put it that way.
It's not fluffy. No.
Yeah, we've shaved the fluff off for this one. But yes, without that prologue, or whatever we're going to call it, it's a divorcee, and she's coming to some money, and off she goes, and life's about to begin. So it could be tripping around Sex in the City, couldn't it?
And literally until she goes through those gates. Well, no, actually, until she meets the man in the...
Yeah.
Although there is the guy that got his throat ripped out by the pig. And that happens earlier, so you know.
We're giving the audience a little bit of a taster of it. So,
yes, that was the best line on Twitter. How long does it take a pig to eat a person?
yeah, it'll be out there.
It's amazing how many people knew.
They know.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Andrene, this has been great, and we're so looking forward to the launch and to getting DietVale out into Hawke's Bay. I know it's already out in the wilds of Christchurch now.
It is.
But Hawke's Bay, are you ready? So thank you for being here with us today. We're really looking forward to the 29th.
Absolute pleasure.
Cool.
Absolute pleasure.
So you've been listening to Made in New Zealand on Radio Kidnappers, the voice of Hawke's Bay.